person when they sit across you, or you're out in the field and you're having this conversation in a meeting. So I've kind of put together a list of questions here, and we're going to work our way through these over the next couple hours. But I think the first thing that the person has to ask themselves is why do I want to participate in what I would consider a non-traditional marketing system. Certainly, from a meat standpoint, we have moved more and more to commodity type of products. Many of our segments of our meats business are either vertically integrated or at least vertically coordinated, and there has a tendency for advantages for large scale and great efficiencies. So I think from that standpoint, you ask somebody, why are you in this business? And then for some people that are just considering it, what can I produce, what kind of animals, especially from a red meat standpoint, I think we'll find that there's a pretty long list of opportunities there. But I think most of the people that we deal with are coming from some sort of animal background, and they already have that product in mind. Am I an expert in the production system? So maybe we're dealing with somebody that they've been in the cattle business for 30 years and they're looking for a different opportunity. However, I think we're seeing more and more people that may not have real strong backgrounds in the animal science or the animal husbandry, if you will, and we'll need to be able to cater to their needs as well. And then you get into the whole thing about the market and who's going to buy my product, where am I going to sell it. A big one that I get every day is how much can I charge for my product, and we'll have a pretty good discussion about that. I like the second to the last one. As a small business owner myself, I ask this every day of the week: will we make money? And I think as we wrap up the discussion, we're going to find that, as many of you are aware, small businesses come and go quite frequently. And I think when you get into something like this, we have to make people aware that they should have a contingency plan for some sort of exit strategy if the business is on the verge of failure. So as we start with the first question, why do I want to participate in this non-traditional marketing system? I think you should get an answer that has something tied to economics. Because we have to think like small business people in ventures like this. And these are some of the kinds of responses that I've gotten from folks in the field. They say, this is something I do anyway, this is a hobby, and I'm looking for it to incorporate my hobby into a little bit of cash flow. I think that's a pretty viable answer. We have to help that person go from a hobby mentality to more of a small business mentality. And I think we can help them make those leaps fairly easily. We just have to ask the right questions. Certainly, I don't know if anybody's aware, but the economy's in rough shape. I did hear yesterday that the recession is over on one of the talk radio programs. I'm not sure that everybody would agree with that, but oftentimes maybe we're looking for just an additional income stream for a household. And I think some of these niche meat systems can be very low overhead and low capital input on the front end. So I think maybe there's an opportunity for that to be a reason to get in. I made note of the animal production systems that we currently have being commodity driven. Many of those have forced large scale production, and small scale producers may or may not have market access, or may not be able to operate on the very small margins that a vertically integrated or a vertically coordinated livestock system could. Some people may want to just participate in our local or the regional economy. And I think a lot of you realize that as the economy has suffered, we've seen a drawback from a lot of national participation in the economy. Farmers markets are seeing record numbers of shoppers. People are staying closer to home, certainly having a tendency to cook more at home, and it's more of an insulating factor. It's a comfort. It's kind of like when we go home on Sunday and having, for me, fried chicken and mashed potatoes and gravy at my mother's house on Sunday is a comfort. We see people drawing into that and maybe becoming a little more localized in their behavior, purchasing behavior with some of these foods. And then if we may have people who are looking to create what I call in meats a line extension, or some value-added aspect to their business. We met at the MBIC, the Missouri Beef Industry Council, yesterday for some grant proposal presentations. We got into a conversation about value added for Missouri beef producers, and one gentleman was talking about the fact that he normally sells feeder cattle in the state, but he's got a number of people locally that are wanting to buy beef from him off the farm, and he is going to incorporate the finishing of 10 to 15 steers per year into his system, so he can have a little value added aspect to it, especially when you look at the fact that finished steers at commodity price today are worth about 85 cents a pound. There's certainly an opportunity to add some value to those animals. So these are some reasons that people will get into this market. Some of the conversations that I have, and I try to caution people, is you need to have a reason. Oftentimes it'll be, well, this is something that seems like it would be fun to do. No doubt, but if that's the real reason you're going to do it, maybe we ought to keep it a hobby and stay out of the small business sector with it. You get to the question about what can I produce. You know, on the front end of this, I guess it seems like the possibilities are endless, and certainly we have some traditional offerings within the Midwest that we're certainly used to, and beef and pork fall in there fairly easily. Lamb or sheep tend to be hobby operations that can certainly fill these niches. And then we see some other things that have grown over the years, and meat goats certainly. I think Charlotte would attest to this. The meat goat industry is growing quite rapidly. In fact, if you look at it as a percentage of against what it was 5 years ago, meat goats are the fastest growing red meat species in the U.S. right now. And then certainly poultry, rabbit, venison, some of these more fringe niches are opportunities for people. We're going to talk a lot more about poultry. We have the third part of this series is dedicated strictly to the poultry business and direct marketing of those niche programs. I think what we have to make sure is we let people know that regardless of what they want to produce, oftentimes they're going to be bound by some local ordinances. Here in Columbia, we've got a pending ordinance where you could actually have 2 laying hens in your backyard for egg production. And it's been in the newspaper. Some of you may have seen that. So some of the local ordinances are shifting a little bit to allow people to participate in that. As you might expect, there is some discussion among opponents of this, saying that if everybody had 2 chickens in their backyard, Columbia might smell like a chicken coop. So, you know, there's certainly some give and take, and you're somewhat bound by local ordinance. And we certainly need to make sure that folks are paying attention to this, because the last thing we want to have happen is we get some capital expenditures and we try to grow one of these little niche programs, and we find out that our county doesn't allow it or our city doesn't allow it, and then we're back to square one. Regardless of what these people choose to participate in, I think it's important that they realize that they're somewhat limited by their expertise and their facilities, and we may be able to direct them into one species or another based on you know, what they currently know or what they have the opportunity or space to participate. I think once somebody decides this is what I want to do, I want to, let's use pigs for example, I want to have a niche pork program, then you have to back up and say, well, am I an expert in the production side of this? Oftentimes folks will have a background. I mentioned that earlier. They're already raising these animals, but they want to do something different with them. I think it's important that if we have people that are new getting into this business, we absolutely have to stress the animal science or the animal husbandry side of this. I say this a lot, that just because it's a niche or because it's a non-traditional market does not mean that it has to be inefficient, and that does not mean that it needs to be devoid of technology and or science. I think this is a point that we have to drive home with people. I recently attended the Communities of Practice workshop in Des Moines with SARE, and if some of you might be familiar with that, I know I don't know if Tish is on with us, but she was up there as well. The pork group, something they're struggling with in helping these producers is they have their pasture pork people are willing to accept that they have very small litter size and that their pigs grow slow and these kinds of things. And I don't think we have to accept that. I think we can employ good animal husbandry, good reproductive management, and we're going to end up with more pounds per pig, more pounds of pork per sow per year for these folks to sell into the market. So I think we have to push the fact that we need to be good animal scientists on the front end of this in order to make any kind of money on the back end. I usually talk to people about, what is your previous knowledge base? What do you know about this? Are you willing to change? Because a lot of our commercial practices or our commodity mentality practices, while they might work, oftentimes we can't use those, and especially if we're in an organic label or a natural label, or if we start talking free range or some of these other opportunities, we have to be willing to change our mindset just a little bit in order to fall into those niches or to participate in those, and we have to have some open-mindedness about it. I think the thing that we, as whether it's extension or just educators, are these people, do they have access to the information, and then how willing are they to adopt that information? And for a lot of you that have been in extension for a long time, there's no doubt you beat your head against the wall because you say, we've been telling this for 20 years, and people just aren't willing to change the way they do things. I think we have to be prepared for that, and maybe we need to find a different way to approach this, but if the information's there, we need to figure out how to get some adoption of it. I have learned the hard way in small business that planning is the key. I think that's especially true when you start, maybe even more so when you talk about animal agriculture. It's a pretty risky venture, no matter how you slice it, because the fact is, once you have animals, you have to deal with them, you have to feed them, you have to make sure that the system's going to go, and it's not something that we can walk away from very easily. And I'm usually very adamant about folks thinking about livestock as it's a meat system, or it's a food animal product system. And obviously, being a meat scientist, as is Dr. Clark, and I know Dr. Clark's on this morning, I think we have to think about the system approach. What is the end goal? Well, for most of us, the end goal is making red meats to move on to a consumer, or eggs or milk or whatever the case may be. So the systems approach, I think, is very critical in this discussion. When we get into this conversation about who is going to buy my product, market studies are critical. And we have some folks over in Ag Econ here at the University of Missouri that are much better versed at having this discussion than myself. But I think market studies can be fairly simple, or as complicated as we want them to be. I think if you pull up, or notice on this slide, I've got a list of 3 case studies here. I'm going to share one of them with you in a moment, and we're going to email these 3 PDFs to you, participants, and I would like for you to look at these 3. This is some work that came out of the Leopold Center at Iowa State, and 2 of these are cattle operations. One of these is a lamb operation, and they were all in Iowa. Very interesting case studies in that several producers wanted to participate in a niche market. They weren't sure how. Actually, some of them will find, like the planned lamb, they were actually in a niche, and they were looking to grow because their market, they had already saturated their market because they were actually selling to an ethnic group in Iowa and had more product than they had customers. So these are real case studies, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to try to share something with you. So if you just hang on a second, I'm going to pull up the full circle. Alright, hopefully you can see what I'm seeing. It says that I'm sharing my full screen. Okay, great. Looks like we're good. This is one example of a case study, and this happened to be pasture-raised beef marketing at Madrid, Iowa. And you can see that Leopold Center and Food Alliance Midwest and Practical Farmers of Iowa, they all went together to work through this case study. And just to give you a real quick overview, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this because I want you to be able to look at these at your leisure. They're very short, fairly well written, but the idea is here that these folks want to participate in something different. And you can see some of the preamble here. It talks about as we change labels or we look at claims for the red meat business, whether it's organic, free range, pasture raised, whatever, we have to figure out how to bring that message to our customer. And the way these three case studies worked, they actually worked with Iowa State, and they brought in an outside consultant that would sit down with these producers, and they had a whole series of questions similar to what I was raising at the beginning of the conversation, and talked about why they wanted to be in the game, and they tried to find what their particular niche was. These are two of the folks that participated, and they go through the whole, what is your history of your business? What is unique about your business? How can we sell this thing? And the consultant spent a lot of time. And in the end, they created some, and we'll go to the bottom of this, they created some marketing materials for these folks. And this is part of their full brochure. But the consultant worked with them to give something that looked professional. My understanding is that this was not at a great cost to the producers in talking with the folks at the Leopold Center. And they still have this particular consultant on retainer as their business changes. And the idea is that this is something, and as you read this case study, you'll find out that this is something that they give to all of their customers, and it very often results in a sale of their pasture finished beef. And they've created a niche where theirs happens to be 100% Angus cattle. They have a closed herd, a lot of different things that they can use to sell this product. They try to sell a little bit based on nutrition and or perceived nutrition, and then they have lots of things in here like cooking tips, as we can see on the screen here. And it's a good way to get fairly well grounded with your customer. And I think what you would find from Don and Nan in this particular case is that they have a good personal relationship with a lot of the customers that they deal with. So they haven't really stepped out and gone into where their customer base is far away from them. We'll talk about some other marketing things here related to web marketing and things related to that, which take you away just a little bit from your customer. Now, I got to bounce back to my presentation here. Let's see what happens. Uh-oh. There we go. So we'll send you the 3 case studies and give you an opportunity to look at those at your leisure. And then what I would like to do with those is Dr. Clark is going to be on part 2 next week. But in the third one, before we start up the poultry discussion, I'd like to have a little bit of conversation about the 3 case studies that we send to you. So hopefully you'll have an opportunity to look at that, and certainly hope that you're planning on being with us for all 3 of these. As we back up and talk more about, my market study or who's going to buy my product, my experience is that we can evaluate locally, ask a lot of questions. I always tell people, well, who else is doing this? Who else is participating? What kinds of things are they asking? How do they approach their customers? How do they find their customer base? You never know what kind of response you'll get. My experience, at least in some of the farmers market businesses, that they're usually pretty open to tell you kind of what they do. They may not give you the in details, but they'll give you a general idea of how they're approaching it. So I guess at this point, does anybody have questions as to where we're at right now? Okay, it's pretty quiet. I'm going to assume not. I'm keeping an eye on that chat as well, so if you want to put some text in there and drop that chat in to everyone, or just to myself, that's fine too. Feel free. I think the last bullet point on here is very critical. Do not assume that your customer wants what you want. We have a tendency as livestock producers that what we do is what everybody would do or what everybody would want. And I think we find that households operate very differently, and I think we have to be open to requests from the customer. If it's something that you can accommodate and you don't mind accommodating it, then I think there's an opportunity here to maybe grow your market a little bit. I think we'll find that especially if you're a livestock producer, and I'll talk more about this in a little while, but if we participate in an ethnic market, there are probably some religious considerations that we may not have, that we may not think about, that our customer will definitely want to think about, and that may make or break the opportunity for the sale. So those are some things that we just can't assume that our customer always wants what we want, and we have to be open-minded to that. So as we get to something that I deal with on a fairly regular basis, and I think Dr. Clark probably does too, where are we going to process these animals? Certainly I'm going to make the pitch that the local meat processors are a good source. Now, we're going to spend a little time here and talk about how we may want to approach this. A good number of the meat processors in the state of Missouri are either state or federally inspected, and they oftentimes would entertain a discussion about a business agreement for a niche market. But I think the key here is we have got to approach these folks with a good plan. They are also small business people trying to survive in a rough economic climate. And when you make contact with these folks and you go to them, you want to have something pretty concrete in hand and say, this is what I want to do. You have to know your product. And be ready for this conversation. And I've had some folks that I talk to here that say, well, I just can't get along with my local meat processor. And when we really get down to the conversation, I said, well, how did you approach it? And they said, well, I just stopped in their butcher shop one day and said, I want to do something with you on killing pigs for me and selling them out the door. And that's probably not the best approach. Small meat processors often are owner, operator, bookkeeper, bottle washer, you name it, and you're going to have to give them a little bit of time to make a schedule, and so they've got time to sit down and visit with you. And the second sub-bullet there, knowing your product, you really need to do some homework on what you have that's unique, and what you think you need from the processor. The other thing is, I think we have to be open to some discussion, because most of these folks have been in these businesses for a couple of generations, and they probably have some good input on how you might approach this business. And a lot of the questions that I would think about if I'm a processor and someone comes to me is, or things that I would expect them to ask is, what is my slaughter capacity? Do I have a schedule? Do I kill pigs on Tuesday? Do beef, lamb? Do I want to kill lambs? Is that something that we deal with regularly? And you're going to have to look a little bit to find the right marriage here. Some will be open to it. Some probably have zero interest. So you got to feel it out just a little bit. And we'll talk about how to maybe make those contacts here in a second. If you're in the beef business, especially when you talk to a small processor, it's critical to know how much cooler space they have. And if you're going to sell a long-aged beef carcass product, let's say we got 17 or 20 days of aging, a lot of these processors don't have enough cooler space to accommodate that, and we're going to have to look at some other opportunities or a different way of aging. Rather than aging on the carcass, we may be talking about aging in vacuum bag or wet aging this product. So a very critical question to ask. And then as it unfolds, you want to know all of the cost and what fees are involved here. And depending on how the processor operates, they may have a separate slaughter fee. They may charge you a certain cents per pound to age carcasses, and then cutting, packaging, storage. These are all things that come into the conversation. When I was in Illinois, I worked with a processor and a pork producer, and the pork producer initially wanted to sell fresh product at a couple of farmers markets locally, and the way the slaughter schedule worked out, the processor was having to kill the pigs on Monday, would cut them on Wednesday in this case, and then the farmers market was a Friday at one place and a Saturday at another. And the producer was having to come in, take the fresh product, get it into coolers, take it to the market, and for them, the logistics just didn't work out very well, because the processor was doing something for that producer 3 or 4 days a week, and not enough that it was worth their while. So what they finally agreed upon is that they were going to sell frozen product in bundles and try to do more direct marketing right to the customer, at least for this particular product. And it turns out that worked very well, and this processor and producer are still working together, and I think the relationship now, if I remember, has been almost 5 years. And it's simply they take pigs in, there's all the known fees per head to put these into a bundle, and then the customer, the retail customer, can actually pick up the bundles at the meat processor's plant. They'd actually built extra storage, freezer storage, to accommodate this. So it was an opportunity for them to grow a little bit, and they have a good relationship. So those kinds of things can work well. The last bullet, I think, spells it out, though. The more streamlined you can make your system, probably the more palatable that will be to the processor that we're dealing with. We can link up to MissouriMeatProcessors.com if you like. There's opportunity there to go through Nikki Cloud, the executive secretary, and you can get a list of all of the dues paying members to the Missouri Association, and I think there's roughly 100 dues paying members. So we have a lot of small plants speckled all across the state of Missouri, and that's a good opportunity to make some contacts. Yes, Debbie.
I'm just wondering if how many people that are on the webinar have actually worked with meat producers and then worked with them and getting into working with the meat processors, if they might like to share a little bit about their experiences working with them. Is anybody out there willing to share anything?
It's a pretty tough crowd today.
Okay, let's go on.
Okay. So as we start getting into the question about the market and where we're going to sell, I think we could easily come up with this list. And currently, the farmers market is quite a growing entity here in Columbia. Well, I'll talk a little more example-wise with that, but we're here farmers market-wise now 3 days a week in Columbia. That if you go out into a lot of the rural communities, there's a farmers market that's usually one evening a week. Those have a tendency to be more vegetable, fruit driven, but now we're seeing the red meats showing up more and more. I think we have 5 or maybe 6, I think there's 5 regular vendors for meats here in Columbia, and that's been growing fairly well. Other options, and we'll look at these individually here as we go, but we certainly direct or off-farm sales. It's probably one of the easiest things to do. There's really no middle person, and we cut a lot of cost out by going this route. I'll make some comments about the grocery chains and whether there's ease of being into the grocery stores, whether it's independent grocers or corporate chains. I think there's opportunities in both, but you have to be on your game to be able to participate in those. Certainly the restaurant trade is somewhere that I'll give you a few examples of how some local people in Boone County have participated in the restaurant trade. And then we'll talk a little bit about web marketing and getting into this the digital age of mail order, web marketing and mail order meats. The farmers markets, I think this is interesting. They've certainly grown dramatically. This banner at the bottom, some of you recognize this as a kind of an aerial shot of the Columbia Farmers Market. A lot of these are going to require an annual membership for vendors, and that nice thing about that is it gives the coordinators of the farmers market some consistency to have vendors in there all the time. If you've been to the one in Columbia, you realize that Saturday morning it's a veritable zoo in there. We have a lot of people participating. There's a lot of traffic. I think maybe the thing about selling meats at the farmers market, that it allows you to build a stronger customer base. And I think in talking with a couple of our vendors, I find that they'll buy something at the farmers market, but they also tend to then create the direct marketing from the farm. You know, I buy a couple of steaks from you today, but what else do you have to offer? Where can I get more product? Can I buy a whole side of beef, for example, or can I buy a whole pig? And that builds the customer base. So then you kind of end up with a two-pronged marketing approach. Most of these farmers markets are going to be regulated by local health, so typically county health or city health ordinances. And I really caution people, make sure you know what's going on, because these vary by county for sure, and some are much more strict than others. I've been dealing with a niche producer in Jefferson County, and a lot of you know where they're south of St. Louis, that it's a fairly strict code there, and they adhere to it very closely. So you have to be on your game and know what's going on, because you don't want to get all set up, ready to go, and then be shut down on your first day out at the farmer's market. So this is part of that planning process that we talked about earlier. I'm going to leave a lot of the rules and regs for next week for Dr. Clark, but most of these farmers markets are going to require meat to be inspected either at the state or the federal level. Most of the health ordinances that you're going to deal with are going to require meat to be sold frozen, and so you'll see a lot of these producers with a chest freezer sitting in the back of their truck or sitting somewhere so they can sell right out of that. And as I stated earlier, you certainly want to check with the health department to make sure that you're abiding by those regulations. Some other things that I think are critical. Those of you that go to farmers markets, you realize that you're usually talking about a fairly narrow alleyway that you're walking, and you need something that's going to be very informative, because my experience is that people are going to they move quickly through these markets, and they're going to make their decisions fairly quickly. You need to have a well-defined pricing, and that needs to be highly visible and and unambiguous. I mean, folks need to know, all right, this is what you have to offer, this is what it costs, and I need to make my decision and move on, because I have about 25 other booths I'd like to stop at. I have other vendors to do business with. So my advice in this is that we need a quick and concise piece of information, and they probably don't need the total sales pitch that you would give somebody that's going to come to the farm and want to look at your cattle or look at your pigs or look at your lambs or goats or chickens. So it takes a little more savvy maybe initially, and if you here in Columbia, a number of our folks are cooking steaks and pork chops and giving out samples. There's no better way to draw folks than free food, for sure. But this quick and concise piece is fairly critical, I think. Just as an example, and I'm sure many of you have been to farmers markets, and otherwise you probably wouldn't be as interested in this topic, but here in Columbia we're 3 days a week. It's kind of centrally located. For those of you familiar with Columbia geography, we're kind of behind the arc at Clinkscales and Ash, over on the west side of Columbia, and again 3 days a week, pretty high traffic. I'm not trying to do commercials for anybody, but if we look at some of the vendors that have either been here a while or are fairly new but seem to be getting traction, I'll give you a couple examples here. Some of you may know Don Mays with Show Me Shorthorns. Show Me Farms has been to Columbia Farmers Market for a while, and Don boils his message down to born tender beef. Tenderness is almost one of the major factor that he sells his beef on. He also talks about it being omega beef with reference to omega-3 fatty acids and the implied health benefits there. Some other points that they have on their marketing materials: no hormones, implants, or antibiotics. And actually, Don and I visited a little bit, and I said that should probably be no added hormones. Certainly, all animals have hormones. And then they also actually offer pasture-raised chickens through their operation. If you're not familiar with Show Me Farms, they sell off the farm. They have a relationship with Jennings Premium Meats at New Franklin, and Jennings kills their cattle and ages them for some prescribed period of time. And so that Jason Jennings is federally inspected, so that gives Show Me Farms the opportunity to sell into a number of markets, and I think we'll find out next week that there's certainly opportunity to sell in interstate commerce as well. Yes, Stacy. Go ahead. Oh, there you are. Okay.
Stacy, no one's hearing you. Maybe are you holding down the button to talk on the bottom left? Stacy, we're still not hearing what you're saying.
Can you hear me now, Debbie? Debbie, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes. Go ahead.
Okay, he mentioned pasture-raised chickens. Would he care to elaborate a little bit on the slaughter process that he does with those?
I wouldn't mind elaborating. The third part of this series is going to be strictly poultry. So I guess I'd kind of like to just let that go. Okay, we're getting some feedback right there.
Byron, that is certainly fine with me.
All right.
But just
Okay.
thank you for the attention that you paid to it, and let's continue on.
Okay. All right. Very good. We have Susie's Grass-Fed Meats, which advertises a 100% grass-fed, locally raised. So you can see these bullets here. And what I've done is I've pulled these straight from their marketing materials. So you start to see some of the buzzwords showing up that we'll see in a number of these markets, and so sustainability is showing up, and a lot of the whether it's free range or local, and we're seeing a little bit of the organic growth in some of these local markets here. I think what's interesting, I had a conversation with some folks last week that they sell both organic and then they sell under a natural label, and their natural label has gained a lot of traction recently, and it's because they indicated it's because they have a very high price point in their organic meats, and they think it's because of where we're at in the economy. So people have pulled back from that, or some of the people that were participating in that organic market have pulled back from that, and they've seen a bump just in what they're selling as their natural label. So there are some external factors, economic factors, that drive this, and I think we have to be fairly cognizant of that. Okay, Wayne, I see that chat pop up there. Definitions for label claims. We're gonna. I think Dr. Clark, you may want to come in here on the chat, maybe but I think Dr. Clark's actually going to visit. There he is. Okay, go ahead, Dr. Clark. I'm not picking you up. Oh.
Okay, Andrew, this is Steve. What you'll need to be sure to do is click the allow button on the pop-up that came in your screen when you first clicked your mic. Yeah, we're still not getting anything from you, Andrew. How long is your reply? I mean, you could include it in the text chat if that would work.
Okay, we'll wait to see how we go there. I know Dr. Clark's going to talk about rules and regs on that. Wayne, I don't know, but I can talk a little bit. I guess maybe we should send out. I've got some information on the label claims as they are, all the legal label claims. We will try to get that to everybody for sure. The secondary question that Wayne had there was direct marketing. How long would you like to age meat? I would say specific to the beef, the bare minimum is a 7-day is a 7-day age. I see her on the chat. Dr. Clark is certainly intending to cover that topic next time, so we should be good on the label claims. But on that aging, I think it's a 7-day minimum on the beef, and if we can get more, I think that's a good opportunity to have maybe a tenderness claim, as long as we can back it up with some data. And that's where Show Me Farms has picked up some shear force data with us in this laboratory, and they're marketing that. And I think their aging is a 14-day, if I'm not mistaken. So, and then the third one there at the bottom, some of you may or may not be familiar. This is a fairly new vendor, a new label that has come to Columbia. Missouri Legacy Beef. This is Mark Mankin out of Salisbury. Some of you know Mark from his days of running the feedlot there, and he's come up with the Missouri Legacy Beef label. And I'll tell you a little more about him because he actually participates in a local deli market here in Columbia, and has had a conversation with one of the corporate grocery chains as well. So we'll spend some time talking more about them. The direct and off-farm marketing. Certainly, if you're a producer that's near a large metro area, I think you have some great potential here for moving pounds of product. But that doesn't mean that if you're not in a metro area, you shouldn't try this. Certainly in the rural area, a number of you through the years, I'm sure, have been party to. You have a neighbor that finishes 10 beef or 6 beef, and you buy one or buy half every year. This is one of the easiest and oldest direct marketing options that we have. Certainly there's some opportunities there if we're talking about custom slaughter, and again, Dr. Clark will visit next week about this. But if you own the animal on the front end, then you have the opportunity for just strictly a custom slaughter and custom cut, however you like. If you're near these large metro areas, and I have a former student that lives in one of the collar counties outside of Chicago, and they participate heavily in some of that suburban market outside of Chicago. And the second bullet is something that they indicated to me, that it requires more education, but likely appeals to more customers with niche language. And I kind of had to pry a little bit. I said, well, what do you mean there? And they said, well, in some of the metro areas, we certainly have a consumer that may not be as in tune to where their meat comes from, and you have to spend a little bit more time talking about your business and how you raise your animals. And here's a case where you don't assume that the consumer knows what you're doing. But then I think it's interesting that this particular producers told me that these consumers are in tune with the buzzwords and the niche language, so they certainly are in tune with organic and natural. And as those things come out in the conversation, this producer would indicate that's going to sell product much more easily. And certainly, if you are near an affluent area, you may have quite an opportunity to have a greater margin from a pricing standpoint. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. It tends, if you are outside a metro area and you're going to have to be going into that area, there may be some more expense for you as a producer with travel and fees and time investment. But if you can have a greater margin in terms of sales, then it may certainly be worth your while. Next outlet, grocery store chains. We had a conversation in Iowa at the Communities of Practice workshop, and there was an effort by the pork niche group, the pork working group, to actually go to a little geographic region around Ames, Iowa, and try to sell this niche label into the independent retailers, so the local mom and pop grocery store. And I'll talk a little bit about why there were some challenges to that happening. There are some independent retailers that may offer some upscale meat departments, and if you can get into these, there's a good opportunity to be the person in there, whether it's the person bringing beef or pork or lamb and even poultry. So, but what we need to realize, and this is where the folks in Iowa had a little bit of a challenge, that even though these are independent grocers, a number of them will participate with wholesale warehouse businesses. And so these are typically a generic label, an Always Save or a Value or some generic label. and they may have a contract or a purchasing agreement that precludes them from buying certain staple items outside of the contract. So this is something that we need to be aware of. And in this case, they had actually identified 7 small grocery stores. All of them would like to have participated. 5 of them did not because they were bound by a purchasing agreement with their provider, their warehouse provider of their other retail goods. Large grocery chains give some of their management personnel discretion for local purchases. Certainly we see this with the Gerb stores and Hy-Vee, Schnucks to a certain extent, so there is an opportunity to get in here. What you have to keep in mind though is likely from a meat standpoint, you won't be front and center. That is very expensive space to procure, and the reality is that you're in there battling with Hormel and Tyson and everybody else from a commodity meat standpoint, and even those businesses have carved out some niches, especially on the poultry side, where it's a little bit tough to get in there, but that doesn't mean you can't do it. Those opportunities exist, and if the management is willing, again, you have to go in there with a good plan and tell them, because they're in this they've been in this business a long time, and they understand their customer flow and purchasing habits and the need or the desire to have retail space. It won't be free. We have to do a lot of homework if we're going to be in a large corporate grocery chain. I'd throw it. Are there any questions? Certainly feel free to jump in here on the chat and ask a question. As is usual, I kind of get moving like a TV evangelist, so I'll try to pause here and see if anybody would like to have some discussion. Or okay, well, seeing none, move on to talk about the restaurant trade. I think this is an opportunity to showcase a specific product. Depending on the restaurant, and usually you're talking about an independent, and we've got some examples here in Columbia that I'll try to share with you. But since the individual restaurant usually doesn't use a large quantity of meat compared to a grocery store, being able to have this as one piece of your market is probably good. I would say unless you're tied into a restaurant chain, the opportunity for this to be a huge pounds of meat mover is going to be a little bit difficult. The 2 examples I'll share with you here are Patchwork Farms here near Columbia. They have featured on the menu at Murray's, our jazz restaurant here in Columbia, the Patchwork Pork Chop. So it's an opportunity for them to have some of their pork in a very popular restaurant, independently owned and operated here in Columbia, and that gives them a little more play in the market. People certainly say, what is the Patchwork Pork Chop, and certainly if you ask them at Murray's, they'll tell you a little more about it. So that's one opportunity then to get some feedback and maybe pick up some customers down the road, especially if that pork chop is of quality. The newer one I mentioned is the Missouri Legacy Beef. They're featured at Haas's Market here in Columbia, and if you're near Columbia and not familiar where that might be and you want to check that out, it's down at the intersection of Nifong and Forum, kind of west of that intersection. Haas's Market is it's a deli that sells a lot of Missouri labeled products, everything from salsa to snack sticks to, in this case, frozen beef. That's a self-service case, and then Haas's will prepare the Legacy Beef hamburger for you, so you can order it right there at the deli counter. And Missouri Legacy Beef has had the opportunity to get in there and into kind of an interesting niche market, as it were. I know that Yes, Debbie.
When you're done with, can you explain Patchwork Farms a little bit more about that it's not an individual person, that it's a group of people?
Okay.
Go ahead and finish with Missouri Legacy first, and then go back to Patchwork.
Okay. Certainly. Um, and then I know Missouri Legacy Beef has had a conversation with the Gerb's stores here in Columbia, store actually down the one on the south end of town, to see about getting Missouri Legacy Beef into their case as well. Very likely that'll be sold as butcher wrap frozen product, kind of as out of the self-serve freezer rather than out of the fresh um, cooler. Yeah, the Patchwork Farms. Yeah, that's I guess Debbie, probably the best way to. That's it's a group. I'm hesitant to call it cooperative. I'm not sure what their actual business structure is. And Debbie, if you'd like to chime in here and give a little more background, feel free. But yeah, not as an individual, but as a group selling, I guess, cooperatively into this market, and that's certainly one opportunity. It's almost the alliance model, producers with a common goal or a common specification on their product. And certainly, Debbie, if you'd like, feel free to elaborate on that, because I think you may have some. I don't know if you have some background in them as
What I
well.
know about them really is that they work with the Missouri Rural Crisis Center a lot. They were, and I don't know how many people are in this at this point, but there were about 20 of them before, and they're all pork producers, and they have a special way of a requirement of how they want the pork to be produced. Now, I don't honestly believe that they're a cooperative. I think they're more of an alliance, and really, Brian, what you've said is about really all that I know as well, and I don't know that much about them, and if it's an alliance, how do they work so well? How do they keep up their production to meet the market demand for selling into the restaurants? And that's a thing that I don't have an understanding of, and I just didn't know if you did or not.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I've talked with one of their producers a little bit, and this is where I ask a lot of questions and I don't get a lot of answers there. So, I think part of their success is that they kind of hold their strategies pretty close to the vest. But it certainly, I think, it is a alliance type of arrangement. So. So that brings us to the last of the piece on the marketing, and this would be the internet or the web marketing. And I kind of step back and view this as a remote marketing opportunity. You probably don't have much personal contact with the end user. We've seen some businesses be very successful at this, and they've grown dramatically. And certainly the best example I can give you is Burgers down in California, Missouri. At one time, my understanding is they had the largest mail order meat sales in the country, and certainly Burgers has grown from a very small country cured ham processor to a multi-million-dollar sales company annually. So that may not be. Especially from a niche, there's a lot of cost involved in this, and especially when we start talking about products that are perishable, we talk about special packaging opportunities, shipping costs, and it's kind of an on-time opportunity that there certainly are carriers that will do this for you, but there's a lot of cost in it. So I guess. If you're a small niche, this is probably the last place that you'll market from a cost standpoint. But the web itself, I think, is perfect for just helping your local buyers find producers. There are strict rules regarding interstate commerce, sales tax collection, these kinds of things, and when we start getting into those conversations, a lot of the producers we deal with get this glazed over look. and they said, I'm not sure about that. So I think when you, at least in the startup phase or in the early years of this, I'm not telling people to not participate in internet or web marketing, but there's a whole set of headaches that goes with it that we have to be in tune for. And I make note here about interstate commerce and rules and regs there, and certainly Dr. Clark will cover that in the second part of our series. Don't have any slides that are specific to some of the advertising. My experience in being, my brother and I own 2 small businesses, and certainly the web is your ally when it comes to getting yourself out there. I guess the one thing I'll say about that before I move on is that that needs to be well thought out, professionally designed, and has some nice, concise information to get the person what they want, and have good contact information. And the one thing that I'll say regarding that is that if you have a website that has a dialog box in it where people are going to contact you, if you don't contact them right away, it starts to become a negative for your business. So if you put that kind of information in there, we definitely want to tell our producers that you have to get back to your customer, because it's an instant gratification world right now with our technology and with instant messaging and email and everything along those lines. Certainly producers are going to have to, if they're going to use the technology to advertise, they're going to have a quick turnaround back to their customer. I'll make a few points about the ethnic and religious markets. A lot of this is driven by your geography. When you go back to those and you start looking at the 3 case studies that we'll send to you, you'll find that the planned lamb group, they sold to a Bosnian market locally. And turns out that in Iowa there were a number of Bosnian individuals displaced from war over there, and a lot of them settled in Iowa. And this individual, the planned lamb, actually sold into that market quite heavily. The ethnic market often, if you're not familiar with it or around it, it's something that's not even on your radar. Especially if now if we're in the Chicago area or here at the university, we actually sell pretty heavily into to the Muslim market with goats and somewhat into the Hispanic market as well. So these are things that sometimes are on the radar of our producers, but can be very lucrative. But they have a whole set of other issues that go with it. You kind of have to try to understand where that ethnic niche is, what the preferences are for these consumers. And obviously, many of you are familiar with the kosher kill, or if we're talking about the Muslim side of it, we generally are talking about halal. This is a whole new set of rules, and you would have to find a processor that is participating in this, or be willing to set up separate kosher kill opportunities. Certainly, if we're close to Chicago or Minneapolis or some of these places, large Midwestern metropolitan areas, these can be very lucrative. I had a producer that I dealt with for a little while that was in the lamb business and had decided to venture into this niche and wanted to sell to the Muslim market locally, and probably would have been successful, except that their consumers wanted to come to the farm, buy the lambs on the farm, slaughter them on the farm, and then take them home. And the producer just wasn't willing to create that situation so that the on-farm slaughter could occur for those customers. And I think it was just more of a comfort level, just a difference in culture. The other things that we probably should visit about just a little bit on this topic is that there is certainly some liability that goes with this, and making sure as a business person that you can cover that liability. To let somebody come onto your farm and to kill an animal and process it, I think most of us can see where there could certainly be some issues with that. So that gets into a discussion about liability coverage and dealing with legal counsel and making sure that you have the correct business structure, that if you have an issue and liability becomes a problem, that it doesn't take the business and all the personal finances attached to it. And that's a completely other discussion with legal counsel, but the business structure becomes kind of critical at that point. So those are kind of the markets as a list. Just some marketing ideas, some thoughts that kind of come to you as you put something like this together. I think it goes without saying that you have to separate yourself from the other producers or products that happen to be available. And unfortunately, I think we find that, and I see this with our college students. You ask college students, how many of you eat ribeyes, and a lot of them will raise their hand, but then when you say how many of you purchase ribeyes, their hands go down. And very often we're talking about price point selection, and in that case the commodity meat products are going to have the advantage. So you have to sell it some other way. You have to separate your product from something else. But here's where I think we as educators have to be adamant that if you're going with claims, and Dr. Clark will talk about some of the claims next week and the legality of the claims, but no matter what, when you get in your advertising and you go with these claims, if the claim is not accurate and you don't have it backed up by some sort of fact, I think credibility quickly goes out the window. I tend to be a bit of a skeptic and maybe a little bit cynical, and there are times when I will go to markets just to get an idea of what's going on. I'll ask a lot of questions, and a lot of times it comes down to it. Well, how do you know this to be true? What have you done some market research? Have you collected information that you know that your product is better than something else? And I'm disappointed if somebody is selling a claim that they can't back up. Something else that, and this may just be my personal gripe, but if you're going to sell your product to me, I want you to sell your product. Don't tell me why Joe Blow down the road does a terrible job and you shouldn't buy their product. Just tell me why yours is good. And then you have to give me enough credibility that I can make that decision for myself. So if you do a good job selling the product to me, then I'm going to gravitate towards it anyway. Most of the directly marketed products that we find do have a unique claim. I tell people, find your niche. You don't have to be all things to all people. And for some of it, the fact that you're just locally grown may be all you need. There certainly are a whole nother set of rules when you start selling under the organic label, the natural, and some of these other things. And be prepared when somebody calls you on it. Do you have documentation? How can you, tell me, how do you back up the fact that this is true? So those are some, I don't know, just some tidbits from Brian's brain that maybe save some headache along the way. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about economics, and this is dangerous for me because, well, I'm not an economist. But I'll take pause here for a second if anybody has a question at this point. Okay. So we get down to the question of what can I charge? Well, obviously, I tell people that, well, if you don't know what it costs to make your product, you have no idea what to charge. And then I think it's reasonable to say, well, then you're going to have to, if you do know what it costs, you're going to have to charge more than your break even and have some sort of profit margin. I tell people, the market will bear a certain price point. So you need to be aware of what other direct marketers are charging in your area. When Debbie and I first got together and we're talking about this and we were going through this slide presentation, I made the comment that here in Columbia, if you look at say a beef fillet that has a lot of unique label claims to it, you may have to pay $15 to $18 a pound for a filet mignon with a lot of label claims to it. If you move into a very affluent metropolitan area, that may jump to $25 a pound. And I've actually seen some on the web that are selling near $30 a pound for some really uniquely labeled and claimed product. So you need to know what your competition is doing, and that's just some simple market research. I've got a link here that when you all get this presentation, you'll be able to actually, the hyperlink will work and be supported. I'm going to try to share my screen here and to go to some work that was done by the University of Kentucky that's got some economic assessment on figuring out what does it actually cost your operation to get animals to the market. So let me bounce out of this here for a second. Bear with me for a minute. I'm going to bring up a different... Oh, you probably see my kids right there. They're good kids. I actually have 3 now. Okay, here we go. And you will get this. This is from University of Kentucky Department of Ag Econ. There's 3 tabs on this particular Excel spreadsheet. There's a beef, pork, and lamb tab. And basically what it does is you can come in here and plug in anything that is blue, you can change. So if you go to the top of this spreadsheet, and this would be the direct cost for producing beef. You can take how many days that your cattle were backgrounded, how many days did you have them in the feedlot. It even has, and I'm very glad to see this, the interest rate. So as business people, we have to figure out what the cost of doing business is from a money standpoint. Obviously 8% is probably a high rate right now. Okay, zoom slider. Okay, Steve just gave me a little note here. I'm going to try to... I'm looking for the zoom. Steve, help me out.
Okay, it's in the Excel window itself.
Okay.
So go back to Excel.
Okay.
Okay, now if you see in the bottom right-hand corner of the Excel
gotcha.
window.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Here, I'm going to blow this thing up. Is that better?
There. Oh, that's much better.
All right, now we can actually see what we're talking about, or what I'm talking about. So then we can plug in the finished weight of our animals, dressing percentage. It can change. Obviously in beef, we're probably talking somewhere between 59 and 65%. But all of that known information can come in here, and then it'll figure our carcass weight for our animal. You can actually change the units. It's interesting. I worked with some European customers one time, and I had everything in pounds, and they wanted it in kilos. So it'll do that conversion for you, and then you can actually plug in what your expectation for carcass beef price is. It gives you the total value. And then the things that you know are the things that you go down and plug in, or the things that you should probably actually go find. Because at the end of this, as we scroll down, it gives you fixed costs. You got some depreciation. A lot of these things you can manipulate. And I think the key one here is operator and family labor. And we certainly need to figure out, how much time do we commit to this. I made mention about the niche pork group in Iowa, and when we were in that working group having a conversation, obviously this is a beef example that I've got here, they said the thing that made some of those small niches not economically viable was that they were spending a significant amount of time and labor on a per head basis that they may not have needed to spend. And that was part of that was just the ability to switch over from a hobby mentality to a business mentality. They were just spending time with animals and doing things that may not have absolutely been required to get those pigs to market in that particular example. So that's something to keep in mind, that if we're charging real time against these businesses, that can significantly affect the bottom line. So we've got the opportunity here to plug in for a beef example. I'll blow this one up for you. The pork one's a little less complicated, not quite as much in there, but still the same kind of opportunity. And then this also exists for lamb. University of Kentucky has some real good other stuff in their Ag Econ website related to this, but once again, I'm not going to recreate the wheel. Somebody else has got this. We should use it, and it's out there. So I'm going to bounce back to our presentation, and there we are. So that's one approach. If you don't know what it costs you to do business, then you don't know what to charge. I'm going to make some reference here to some whole animal or whole carcass sales. Definitely, the example I gave you from the producer in Illinois, they were selling freezer bundles, which was essentially breaking down sides of beef, and you actually got the whole side of beef, but it was in a freezer bundle. Dr. Clark will talk more about this next week, about rules and regs, but if you're selling a live animal to an individual, then it's if they own the animal on the front end, then you may have an opportunity for custom slaughter and processing versus having to be killed under inspection. I'm not going to elaborate on that too much though. But if you're using these sales methods, so it's not a retail approach, it's actually now I have a side of beef or I have a whole pork. This gives your customer the opportunity to make more of the decisions on how they end up taking that product home. I'm going to share with you this publication called the Whole Animal Buying Guide, and this is something that came out of the Leopold Center at Iowa State and the Meat Processors Small Working Group, and I'm going to bounce out and share that with you here. It's a PDF, and it's actually it's downloadable from the web, and we'll give you that opportunity or that information. But this is the Beef and Pork Whole Animal Buying Guide. I'm going to bounce through a couple of pages here. Here's what they have to offer. This is a really neat publication. You can actually buy it in print form too, in full color. They offer it in a black and white version, but if you have the opportunity, just go online and download it as a PDF, then you can provide this to your folks however you see fit. They took a real whole approach here, a holistic approach, in that they've got some livestock and meat marketing terms, some recommendations on shelf life and storage of red meats. Wayne, you had asked about aging. There's actually a specific point in here about beef aging, and other things related to meat inspection and understanding how it works. But the question that we get a lot here at Mizzou, and I apologize, I just got to click through here till I find one. There we go. I took my steer to the locker, or we had these sides of beef at the locker, and I only brought home this amount of meat. I think the locker stole my product. Well, here's a real telling example, and I think this is good stuff, because we go from a live weight to a carcass weight to a retail take home, and a lot of people are somewhat dumbfounded when they figure out that the 1,200 pound steer, you only take home about 67% of the carcass weight as retail closely trimmed cuts. And a lot of people will get, I've had some people get angry about this and say, well, I want the whole thing. And I said, well, the whole thing means that you'd have to take home the hide and the bones and the fat trim and everything else. But if you can show this in this format, a lot of people rest easier realizing that their local meat processor did not steal 500 pounds of product from them. There's an example in here for the pork as well, to give an idea on cutout for that. If you take this thing in the color version, now we've got a really nice set of color palettes that come from the meat buyer's guide in full color. And I like to share this with folks and say, look, if what does your family like? Are you a roast family? If it's not roast, what else might we get? And we can go through and have that conversation with them and give them what the options are. So this one has the full color palette. As you can see, we bounce through the beef, and it's also available in here for pork. So real nice, nice publication that we should be taking advantage of, I think, in these kinds of conversations. I'm going to bounce back out and there's another set of spreadsheets, Excel spreadsheets that are out of Kentucky that are related to what I just showed you there on this whole animal buying guide, but it's actually in much more detail. And some of you might actually find this not just for whoever your producer you're dealing with, but I think you'll find this personally useful. And I'm gonna bounce to that now, and we'll use the beef cutout one as our example. So I'm gonna share with you my okay. Blow this thing up a bit so we can have some good examples. And the contact information you see here, again, this is University of Kentucky. The contact for the folks that built the spreadsheet are actually on here if you wanted to go and have some questions with them on how some of these macros and some of these functions work. But it's really straightforward. I like this. I use it a lot when I look at pricing and some cutout value. But we can come in here, and again, it's just like the other spreadsheets. If we change, we can change the live weight of the animal. We can change the dressing percentage, and everything's going to correct for us, telling us what our expectation is for slaughter weight. But the real beauty of this is then what expectation do I have in terms of a percentage of my carcass and then total pounds coming from a specific cut. So right here we have the round. If we were to take the top round out, expectation is there's however many pounds of that, and we can put a value, whatever value. It can be a retail or it can be a wholesale value. Plug the price in, and it's going to value that for us. So these are expectation. You can plug in either for wholesale or retail expectation. Obviously, a lot of these are retail cuts. So everything, porterhouse, T-bone, strips, whatever. There's some give and take here. The one thing that this spreadsheet does not account for is some of the options. You kind of have to know this. So if you've got a T-bone, you're not going to have a tenderloin. So we need to be aware of that on the front end, that we're not going to get both. And that's the only thing that this particular spreadsheet cannot account for, does not account for, that if you have one, you don't have the other for some of these cutout options. But I think, and it goes, we can see here, chuck all the way down to some different miscellaneous products. There's an opportunity in here then to put in the slaughter fee and a processing fee if they're two different things, and it would give you then an estimate of the net revenue for cutout. So that's a way to value, again, to value the product, the carcasses on the rail. Kentucky has this for beef and for pork in this particular setup. I've been trying to find one for lamb. I have not had much luck with that. I'm going to contact the folks down in Kentucky and see if they've done anything on lamb, and then it would also be nice, obviously, Charlotte, for the goats, and to have that information as well. It's just a little harder to capture that compared to beef and to pork. Okay. Yes, go ahead. Let's see here. Go ahead.
Myron, is there any information out there that would talk about what average price would be for retail instead of just starting from scratch on that? I wouldn't have an idea of the difference in the value of a porterhouse and a T-bone steak.
Yes, that's actually a very good question. You have an opportunity for a couple of things. When we price product at the Meat Lab here at Mizzou, I use what's called the yellow sheet, and there's also and that gives you week to week, actually day to day variation in wholesale and retail value. There's a generic version of that that I think you can. I think actually no, you have to subscribe to Yellow Sheet. But there are some retail and wholesale pricing tools that are available. So I subscribe to Yellow Sheet to get the real time where we're at today. Certainly USDA has some updates on cutout values, and it goes to wholesale, and then there's some wholesale to retail spread information, and I will try to find those links for you all, because when we just recently did a study with BASF, and we needed to find some of that wholesale to retail spread. So if you and there's also the carcass to wholesale spread information. So if you know one piece, which typically for us is extension folks, typically we can get the carcass value, then it'll allow us to bump to the wholesale and then to the retail. I'll try to find that information and include that for you. But that's a very good question. Is there anything else related to that? Those prices. One thing I want to share, I show you beef and pork on this on these links. The goat, there is some information, and some of you may or may not be aware of it, but LSU publishes, Louisiana State University publishes the probably the most definitive cutout information on goats, and I'm going to go link us up there. It's also a PDF, and this is the meat goat guide, and it's been updated. This again is a PDF that you can download from the web, and you can just go to the LSU Ag Center. I will also attach it here. It's for public use. It's kind of a neat setup because it goes through the different confirmation and selection criteria on meat goats, and it has what those criteria are, and then you've got these pictures that talk about the conformation of these goats all the way through, so different examples of market kids. But I'm going to kind of zip through this here because I want to show you. Alright, so then we get to some of the carcass conformations, and then there's been an effort to break these out. Talks a little bit about how would you assign kind of an unofficial quality grade. Goats are interesting creatures in that they don't fatten like every other animal, and the goat's going to have a tendency to get fat a little bit over the shoulder, but not over the loin. So a lot of the things that we employ in livestock cutout and yield, they don't apply to the goats. But what they've tried to do at LSU is very similar to the restaurant cutout guide. The IMPS cuts for lamb, they've done a similar thing, and this is the Fresh Goat series on how you may take a certain weight carcass or a certain range in carcass weight, and how that may want to be, how you may want to cut that and market that. And if we look here, we have the platter goat, which is 15 pounds or less of carcass weight. Obviously, we're going to take the back butt off this thing and probably sell it in its entirety, kind of as a roaster or a smoking product. And then as the goats get bigger, they talk more about cut out into food service cuts, some hotel, restaurant kind of cuts. Very similar, if you're familiar with the lamb cutout series, this is very similar. My experience here at the university is we kill a number of meat goats in the fall, during the fall semester, and we sell goat in pretty large pieces to the clientele that we have here. They're not particularly interested in a fancy retail cutout. So we basically break our goat carcasses here into 4 pieces, the leg, the loin, and we'll break the shoulder from the breast, but usually it goes out in pretty large chunks. And I think you'll find that that's true for a lot of goat retail marketing. So that's just another opportunity for some information as it pertains to the goats. Again, lamb information is just a little harder to capture, and when I get some other information, I'll try to update that, and I'll get with Debbie to make sure that we can get that out to the participants in this series. So we're coming down the stretch here. I've talked a lot. The question is, at the end of the day, am I going to make any money doing this? I've been in 3 small business ventures. One of them failed miserably. One of them is, as my brother likes to say, is starting to see some light, and we have one that's doing fairly nicely. And they're all ag related. And when I get in conversation with folks about this, how you got to be honest, and it's frustrating when you try to start something and you think you've done your best job at it, and it's still doesn't seem to be getting any traction. Well, maybe there's a reason for that. But on the front end, I think we have to tell these producers that you have to be very honest when you look at this, balance your books. You do have to charge labor. Labor is a huge expense. I don't think you can just say, well, it's my hobby and I'm going to do it anyway. That could work until the business has the opportunity to grow, and you realize that there are some nuts and bolts and some black and white opportunities here to make sure that it is actually covering its expenses. So, I reiterate what we started was that we have to treat this thing like a business. In conversation with some of the folks in econ talking about small business, a lot of them fail within the first 3 years. A lot of them fail within the first year, obviously, but they see some light at the end of the tunnel in the 3rd year. Usually you've got your feet on the ground. You figured out what works and what doesn't work. If it's a low overhead operation and you don't have a lot of capital expenditure, you may be in the black in the first year, and I certainly hope that's true for the people that we deal with. But patience certainly is the virtue that we have to stress here. I talked to somebody that's in a totally different small business recently, and they said that they're big, and well, I'll tell you what it is. It was a restaurant slash microbrewery, and it was being built, or it actually was built in the Soulard district in St. Louis, where they're doing the revitalization of some of those areas. And he said the biggest challenge they had, and there were partners in the business, excuse me, as they stepped back from their business, in their first couple of years, they went in whole hog, pardon the pun, but they had the website, and they had the billboard, and they were on the radio, and they advertised on Fox Channel 5 in St. Louis, and really were looking for their biggest splash. And what they learned is that as they created a customer base and they moved to being a more established business, they somehow were afraid to cut some of the costs. And obviously, being on Channel 5 KTRS in St. Louis is not a cheap venture. And they figured out that with some retrospect and some more analysis, that they weren't getting a lot of bang out of television advertising for some reason. And where did you hear about us? And I mean, it's a great question to ask. A lot of times we find out in these niches, especially meats niches, is a lot of word of mouth advertising. So at the end of the day, we shouldn't be afraid to tell people, reassess this thing. The nice thing about a website is usually once you have it up and going, other than the updates, the maintenance fee of a website's not usually real great. We usually have a lot of upfront cost in printed advertising, and there are a lot of different options. And I'm a proponent of doing business locally, but in two of my small businesses, I go to some online printing services where I can do kind of some quick and dirty advertising design. There are some services out there where you can print 1,000 glossy colored business cards for $150, and you design it all on the site. They mail it right to you, and you're in business with a professional looking business card. Same thing's true for these two-sided rack cards that fit into an executive sized envelope. You see them at places like Bass Pro, and if you ever spend any time in Branson, you see them in every hotel lobby that is there. Those are kind of a double dip kind of advertising tool, in that you can post those places, people can pick them up, but they also fit into a legal size envelope, and you can mail those out to your customers as well. And you can do those pretty much on the cheap. So we can help people kind of back out of some of the high cost advertising, and but we need to let them know that they need to assess what's working and what's not working to let some of those costs go. Well, Debbie, I've had the hammer down here. This is actually my last slide, and it speaks to the final question that we had there on the front end. And oh, we have a question. Go ahead.
Byron, I feel like I'm asking you all the questions. I'm
No,
sorry
that's
for
fine.
that, but
No, that's fine.
the public, I don't know what the right word, the brochure or something that you're talking about that was fairly cheap. Do you have a sample or an example of something that you thought that was really a good marketing tool that had been used?
I think there are several good examples. When we email you the 3 case studies, each one of those has the brochures that were created, and I think you'll notice that they differ in their design, but all three of those producers indicated that those designs worked well. So there's 3 examples that you'll get. I can certainly provide you with some designs that are non-meat businesses, but the design would probably be very applicable and cross over fairly well. And one of them, I have one that has worked very well from one of my businesses. And certainly, if you want to send me an email or get some contact from me, then I can drop that out, and I'll let the U.S. Postal Service deliver it to you. But we can get those to you, no problem. Is there anything else related to that? Okay, well, kind of my final thought before we can open it up for some discussion after I get here, but my brother and I are in a couple of businesses together that I've talked about, and I told you one failed miserably. Part of it was that I don't know that we had a contingency plan, and these are things that we really need to talk to people about on the front end. We hope that it's successful, and then if we want it to grow, we say, all right, we seem to be going somewhere. We hope that it can grow, but then if you get into a business like this, kind of if it's late in your career or late in your life, and you need to have a couple of contingencies. One is, what do we do to get out of it if it doesn't go? One is there a succession plan for this business? Do we bring somebody on board to transition as we want to retire out of this business? And these are questions that most people don't like to talk about because we assume that we're all going to live forever and do this forever and retire on the day that we die. But I think it's very critical to have an out, or at least a contingency. It's especially true in a livestock business. You know, at the end of the day, and you finally make the decision that this is not working, you know, where are you gonna move the animals? What are you gonna do with your breeding stock? I mean, a lot of these are easy decisions, right? If you're in the beef business and we just show up at the sale barn and sell them, and we take what we can get, those kinds of things. But if you've got a lot of capital investment in this thing, so we've got equipment invested in it, how can we move that? How can we get some value? Obviously, it's depreciated over time, but you know, where can that go? The one thing I think is interesting is, and I never thought about this until it kind of happened to me, can the business be sold in its entirety? Is it something that actually the business plan and the physical business is a good idea, but maybe you're not the right person to run it? Or maybe you got into it and it wasn't nearly as much fun as you thought. It's going to take more time investment, so maybe someone else would be better suited to have it. So you need to think about, well, if I were to sell the entire shooting match today, you know, could I do it? What would it be worth? And those are some questions I think you have to answer. But just speaking from experience, having a plan to dissolve a business or liquidate or sell a business saves you a lot of headache in the end. One thing about the state of Missouri, and a lot of you I'm sure are aware of this, we are one of the easiest states to form a limited liability corporation. It's actually very cheap, and when you form an LLC in Missouri or some of these other different business structures, if you have you know, if you work with legal counsel, somewhere in your articles of organization, there will be a page at the end that's the wrapping up and the dissolution of the business, and that plan is taken care of for you. So if people actually get into a formal business structure that's not a sole proprietorship, then you know, that there are some of those things are already taken care of for you. Okay, so we're approaching the 11 o'clock hour. I'd like to open it up for discussion, or if Debbie, if you have anything you'd like to add. I know I could make some comments about the Communities of Practice workshop in Des Moines. I can do that right before we break, but pertaining to what we've talked about this morning, or I guess what I've talked about, are there any questions or comments? Certainly appreciate feedback. This is my first shot at a webinar.
Are there any people out there who have any questions or comments as far as what Brian has covered today, dealing with the marketing aspects of any of this? Okay. Brian mentioned the Communities of Practice a number of different times, and I'll let him take just a few minutes to kind of talk about that. It was a professional development training that Iowa State had received. It was a competitive grant, and all 12 states were involved in sending folks up there. And in visiting with Brian and putting this webinar together, he expressed an interest in some of the different things that he would like to see happen with the meat producers and the meat processors. And with that in mind, I sent him up on travel scholarship up to Iowa to attend this training, and I'll kind of let him explain what it was, and then kind of some things that he's thinking about and working with the meat processors and meat producers. And then when he's done, we'll go ahead and kind of wrap this up just a little bit. I do have another question I want to ask all of you too as well when Brian's done.
Okay, thanks, Debbie. The Communities of Practice workshop was very interesting for me. I was just one of a very few academics that were actually there. The Leopold Center at Iowa State kind of was the driver, and the Communities of Practice concept, and a lot of you may or may not be familiar with it, but you know, it's just basically pulling together entities of a like goal and trying to carve out these niches for all kinds of products and programs and efforts. And there are some that are related to some inner city where I learned a lot from this standpoint. The concept of a food desert. I had no idea what that was until I went up there. And we had folks from the Chicago areas that were working in these communities of practice indicating that in some of the inner city of Chicago, some of these what are old suburbs now, there are no grocery stores, there are no farmers markets, it's a food desert, there are no restaurants. And so these people have a little bit different goal, and they're working with their community development folks, with the city, and then a lot of nonprofits that come together, and they try to collectively bring back, in this case, food buying opportunities to those areas. You contrast that with something like in southwestern Iowa, where there's a community practice that marries up the rural economic development, local extension, some rural advocacy groups, and then trying to get these systems in place. So maybe it's a county commission is working to draw an ethanol plant, and then linking the ethanol plant up with local niche producers of beef to have access to co-products coming out of the plant. And so it's just kind of it's local web creation or networking, so that there are folks that have a common goal. What came out of the Iowa's done a very good job at this, and they have a number of different working groups. I mentioned the small meat processors working group. Obviously, I have a real interest in that. And then there's the niche pork working group. There is a grass-based beef working group, and they just try to help niche producers with market access and become conduits of information. Where I see that moving us in Missouri, specific to what I'm interested in, is because I'm the technical advisor to the Missouri Association of Meat Processors, I would like to try to link up some of our entities so that a producer has the tools to have a conversation with a processor, so that we get some value added here, so that we are, if a local producer wants to go through a local processor, they know how to have that conversation. We create that information for them. So something like what we're doing today is certainly one aspect of that. We've opened an information conduit. Now there's a link between me and everybody sitting in on the webinar, but then hopefully that link goes from you out to, it could be a specific producer, or maybe it's someone else now that you're dealing with your county commission, or local county health, as you start to have conversations. So we've got a farmer's market and this person wants to sell meat here. Now you are a little better tooled for that to occur. So that's kind of how that unfolded. It was a really neat opportunity. These communities of practice are really broad sweeping. They can be in really any topic area, as long as you get enough buy-in with stakeholders to get a collective effort to move forward. And if later down the road here you want more information on that, I brought home a lot of information related to how the communities of practice are created and administered and funded, which is probably maybe the most critical piece. So I guess I'll wrap that up, Debbie, and then I think you said you had another question for the participants.
Anybody have any questions for Brian about the communities of practice? There's some potential things that might be happening in the future with this, perhaps? Okay, the next thing I'd like to do, I know that Andrew has some thoughts in mind and has already started working on his presentation. If not, he's probably got it done already. But most of you, I'm hoping, will join us next week. And okay, Andrew, go ahead and say something.
I'm going to say something just mainly to make sure I can get this silly system to work for me. Can
Yep, you're
everybody hear
on.
me?
Yes,
Wonderful.
we hear you.
All right, so just
Andrew, let's see if we can get your volume boosted before you go any further. Down next to your talk button is a drop-down arrow next to that padlock. If you would
let's try that.
open that, you'll have a
Does that
choice
sound-
of. Go ahead and go up to high on your volume level if you can.
All right, let's try that.
No, it's
Maybe
better.
that's too loud.
No, that's
but
that's
okay.
better.
Other than it's hideously loud in my ear, but that's okay. Anyway, just brief promo. Yes, I see a lot of folks are interested in stuff, and I'm modifying and adapting the slideshow as I go on the fly here with after hearing Brian. So we'll see you next week, and sounds like I figured out how to make the microphone work. Enough for now. Thank you.
As a follow-up to that, what I'd like, are there some specific questions, knowing that we're dealing with labeling, rules, and regulations, are there specific questions that you would like to see answered for next week? If there are a couple of them out there that you just kind of want to throw out. Okay. Well, I think that's it for now. We do have this as a recording, so at some point, perhaps later towards the end of September, after all of the 3 webinars are completed, the webinar will be out on the website, and all of the attachments or the handouts, if we were in a face-to-face setting, all the handouts that you would get will be also on the website as well. And when that comes available, I'll make sure that you all know. I want to say a big thank you to Brian. I think that he's done a fabulous job in presenting this information to us. I know the first time that he sat down and went through it with me, I learned a lot. I hope that you did as well. I would also like to let you know that all of you should have filled out a quote-unquote pre-test. What I'm going to do is email to you now a post-test, and that test more or less is just going to see knowledge gained. And as part of the plan of work with the SARE PDP, I need to do some reporting back to them to answer the questions. Okay, so what information has gained? Was there an increase in knowledge? And then what kind of change in behavior will actually take place because people attended this? So in the future, I will probably be emailing you some questions as well to see what you've done now that you have this information. So again, thank you very much, Brian. Appreciate it. And Andrew, we look forward to hearing from you next week. Thank you, everyone, for coming in. Have a good day. Brian, I'm sorry, Steve, is there anything I need to do for making sure this is recorded then?
No, we just need to remember to turn it on before we start. When I saw your note, I turned that on, so I'm about ready to shut it off now.